Hello, thank you for joining me for another edition of Read It Again. Thank you especially to all of you who have already liked and subscribed this channel and who have continued to come and to view and to subscribe and to comment. I appreciate that. I really do appreciate being part of this community. I appreciate all of you who have been posting some great videos that I've had an opportunity to see and comment on as well. I really do appreciate that, and I also want to apologize for basically not posting any videos for 3 weeks. I kind of knew that this was going to happen simply because of where I am and what I'm doing. I've been teaching classes in the afternoon to Palestinian Muslim kids most afternoons. That has been going on the entire summer, but also there was going to be 2 weeks where I was helping run a summer camp hosted by the college I'm at, Bethlehem Bible College. And when this was going on, I was incredibly busy. And when I was not incredibly busy, I was incredibly tired. Basically, my day for 2 weeks subsisted of waking up in the morning, having some time of devotions, and then from about 7 to 8, preparing for my 4 English classes that I would be doing at the summer camp. That had to be very high energy, high paced. It's summer camp, so it can't be like a classroom type setting. So that actually requires more work to make it more fun. So I would prepare for that, starting some in the morning, leave about 8 o'clock in the morning, head over there, where that was being hosted and where that was being held. I would have to be there for doing 4 classes or 4 sessions, one with 6-year-old, one with 7 and 8-year-olds, one with 9 and 10-year-olds, and then one with 11 and 13. So there's very broad-based, you can't just do the same thing with every group. They had to be all very different. Very high energy, very fast paced. In between those, there was break times and game times that I was also helping with crowd control and helping with just managing. It helps to have extra people there because these groups are about 30 kids each. So anyways, we were doing that in the afternoons. When that ended, they'd have a wrap up and a review session. I'd have about an hour and a half to prepare for my lessons, and then I would teach the lessons that I've been doing all summer. Those would go until about 7, and then I would begin preparing for the next day's classes, and I do about another hour of preparation in the evenings, eat some dinner, go to bed. That was my week or my life for a couple of weeks. And so I'm sorry, but I wasn't watching any videos, I wasn't posting any videos, I wasn't doing really any touring either. I was just working. But that is over, that is past. I'm actually done with both of those. So this last week that I'm here, a little more than a week, almost 2 weeks at this point, that I'm here, I will have the opportunity to do a lot of touring, a lot of catching up on the things I haven't yet seen and going on some real quote-unquote professional tours instead of just seeing it for myself, going with a group of people who are being told exactly what we're seeing and the history behind there. So that plans to be a lot of fun. But anyways, I also need to catch up on some review. Now I'm titling this post my recent reads wrap up, but really this is my July reads wrap up. It's now 2 weeks into July or August, and I just now getting to it, so shame on me. Anyways, that is that. So in the month of July, I will count them at the end. I don't really know how many books here, but I've got it posted on Goodreads. So I'm going to be looking at the screen over here to see my Goodreads reviews to help me remember, and then here. While these are playing, I also did have the opportunity one of the weekends during my busy time to go visit the city of David, and this is a historical site. Now, the city of Jerusalem today, the old city that's walled in, is actually from the walls that we're seeing are only 500 years old. So again, they're pretty new. The city, Jerusalem, has gradually worked its way up the hill, and then the part that was working its way up has gradually faded out of the city. So actually, the entire southern side below the walls is the old city, starting with the Canaanite time and then the Jebusites, and then David conquered that and David's time, and then Solomon built a temple at the very top. At that point in time, that was the very northern end. Now it's actually the southeastern end, but it was the very northern end of the city at the time when Solomon built the temple. And then Hezekiah did some major reforms, cut off the entire bottom half of the city, rebuilt a new wall to defend against the Assyrian attack that happened. That's in Jeremiah and also in 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles. You could read the story of Hezekiah and what he did to change that. And then during the Herod's time, again, the walls were expanded on the northern end, cut off on the southern end. There was like villas and beautiful areas outside the city walls on the south. And so over time, what we now call the Old City was gradually creeping up north. And below that, there is this huge, beautiful archaeological dig, an archaeological site. So the views you're going to see and the pictures you're going to see are coming from that. Also, there are 2 tunnels underneath that were a way to pump water into the city. One was all the way back to the Canaanite times, and this is when David was conquering Jerusalem, he said, the person who's going to get in is going to go through these tunnels to open the walls, and so the rest of us can go in, and that's actually how they did it. The tunnels you're seeing that I videoed were that. There was another set of tunnels called Hezekiah's tunnels. Everyone says this is the best thing to do. However, I didn't feel like getting wet. So when I was doing this tour, I chose to do the dry tunnels because I didn't feel like getting water up to my waist because I wasn't going home right after that. And so I didn't want to walk around the city for half a day with wet pants. So anyways, I went through the older one. These tunnels are about 3,800 years old that you are going to be seeing. And then I also climbed back up. There were 2 ways to go back up. One would be from the Pool of Siloam all the way to the city, basically the way Jesus went during the Second Temple period. It would be the way people would enter the city. They would ritually wash at the Pool of Siloam, which there's a photo of that here, and then they would walk up to the city ritually pure to go into the temple. I didn't use that route. I again chose the older route. It's called the dung route, so you can imagine what these tunnels were originally used for. Most people don't choose to use this, but I chose the road less traveled up those tunnels instead because they were also used. People were hiding in these tunnels at the time. They were completely out of use, but people were hiding in these tunnels when Rome destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD. And so there were actually people that were living in there until they were eventually caught and slaughtered inside these tunnels. So I just wanted a different approach. Instead of the common route that people see, I took the different route again. So you can see some of that. Anyways, that is the city of David. Now on to my reviews. Like I said, I did read a few books. I'm going to start with my fiction reads. I have 1 book and then 1 series, which is actually 6, or I'm going to count it as 4 books that I read from a series. First book is Recursion by Blake Crouch. And honestly, this book is overrated. On the one hand, it's a brilliant idea. It's good writing. It's got main characters that are well fleshed out. But on the other hand, the science is just horrible in this book. The core premise of the book is built on an understanding of the memories and how they work that is just, it doesn't work. It's just plain wrong. In the book, we're using memories to jump back into time into our past selves. So someone in the future is using a memory to jump their consciousness into a younger version of themselves that's in that memory. However, memories just don't work that way. How we remember and what we remember is not accurate to what really happened. And the further back the memory goes, the less accurate that memory has. That's scientifically proven. Our memories are not reliable. They're not trustworthy. They're not accurate. So we wouldn't be able to jump into an alternate universe of our past memories because it's a universe that wouldn't exist. So, like I said, that science, that's the biggest reason, but there's a few other elements that are also off the wall. The science in Blake Crouch's book is bad. It's just bad. And so my perspective is Blake Crouch does for science fiction what Dan Brown does for history. He writes really good books that are incredible. They're very exciting. They're very fast-paced. They're very readable. And they're immensely popular. However, they're just not accurate. Dan Brown's history is absolutely horrible. And Blake Crouch's science is absolutely horrible. So if you don't care about the science, then go ahead and read the book. It's going to be a great book. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. For me, I gave it 3 stars because I love the story. I just hated the science fiction, the science end of the fiction. So that's that. Recursion. I do plan on reading his other books. He's a new author to me. Like I said, I do plan on reading more from him. Hopefully, it won't be as big of a problem for me in the future, but it was in this book. So that was Recursion. Then, like I said, I was reading a series, and I read Brian McClellan's Powder Mage trilogy. And first I read, there were 3 novellas that are like prequels to that. The Girl from Hrusch Avenue, Forsworn, but anyways, you're going to see them over here. 3 novellas that I read. I'm counting those as one book because they're all very short. It's really like a chapter or 2 each, equivalent of a chapter or 2 each. So you could knock out any one of those in an hour, maybe an hour and a half. My reviews for those are on Goodreads if you're interested. I also read the Powder Mage trilogy. First book, Promise of Blood. Second book, Crimson Campaign, in July. Third book, I'm actually counting it here because convenience sake, I'm including it, but I finished in August. The Autumn Republic, which is the third book. The Autumn Republic actually was my favorite of the 3. I think he ended this trilogy well, which doesn't always happen. Brian McKellen did that, and I'm very appreciative. In all, I felt the world building in these books was really good. The magic system, it's not as good as like a Brandon Sanderson magic system. Well, world building wasn't as good as Brandon Sanderson anyways. Nobody's as good as Brandon Sanderson, living at least. But anyways, the world building was good. The magic system was good. The plot varies okay to good, depending on the book and depending on the series. However, I didn't really much care for the characters. There was only 1 or 2 characters that I really liked. One of those, Kapul, the girl, she's like the best friend. She's mute to one of the main characters. However, she becomes very OP at the end of book 1, and I don't want to say much more than that. It's probably already a little bit of a spoiler. So that kind of ruined her for me. But otherwise, all of the other main characters, Taniel and Tomas, I didn't really much care for them. Adamant, I kind of liked. However, even him, okay. So, I mean, the characters weren't lovable, but the story was good. And the story, really, basically what it is, we're looking at a flintlock fantasy. We're looking at the time of basically about the French Revolution. And I really was in my mind comparing a lot of what was happening to what happened in the French Revolution. So there is that. And that aspect of it was really good. It's a unique, most fantasy that I read is Sword and Castle, dragons. Well, usually I don't like dragons, but that time period. And so this is a later time period, one that I don't see a lot of in fantasy. And the main group, Powder Mage, these are people who gunpowder is their form of magic, and they can do special things when they're either snorting gunpowder or tasting it or ingesting it, or some people can just use it even without getting it in their body. But so they're one group, and then there's other group of magicians that are more of a traditional type of magicians, and then there's a few others. There's the books are good. I encourage you to read them. However, you're probably not going to like a lot of the characters, because one of the things that really bothers me in a lot of fantasy is good versus evil. When I see fantasy, I want good versus evil. And all of the heroes in this series are Byronic heroes, meaning they're fighting for the side of good, but they're genuinely not good people themselves. So that was a disappointment to me. A lot of modern fantasy, it disappoints me in that way. So if that doesn't bother you, fine, but it does me. Now, these are 3 that I did not read. I listened to. These are 3 great courses that I got from Audible. I specifically chose those because I'm living in Israel, Palestine for this summer. And so I wanted to get some that really would talk about a lot of the things that I'm going to be seeing, that are going to be discussing a lot of the things that I'm experiencing, or just the Holy Land. And so the 3 of these that I got, one is the History and Archaeology of the Bible by Jean-Pierre Isbell. The second one is The Holy Land Revealed by Jody Magnus. And the third one is The World of Biblical Israel by Cynthia Chapman. And honestly, I just did those in the opposite order. I finished them, Cynthia Chapman's first, Jody Magnus second, the Jean-Pierre Isbell third. Of these, The World of Biblical Israel was the one I liked the least. She basically, her perspective was that all of the Old Testament was either written or compiled during the exile time period. So anytime she's talking about anything biblical, she's talking about what did those in the exile, how did they understand this? It's an interesting thought process, but she pulls it too far sometimes. And I firmly disagree with her. I think there are very clearly many parts of the Old Testament that were written well before then and were not edited or were not heavily edited during the time period. There are some other scholars who would agree with her, a minority. However, none of them take it as far as she does in this, and she just goes absolutely ridiculous. So if you are going to look for a great courses series on the Holy Land, hers would be the worst of your options. The second worst, or the middle one, would be the History and Archaeology of the Bible by Jean-Pierre Isbot. This one has actually done great courses combined with National Geographic. So as far as the listening experience, he is definitely a better, many great courses, the professors are doing them themselves, and they're not public speakers, they're not good public speakers. This is not true with this one. The production value is really good. The listening ability is really good. Also, I believe this is a live experience. So if you are watching a video of this, I don't know if there's a video for it, but I believe they do based on what I was hearing. That would be really cool because he'd be talking about the things not in a classroom setting, but actually there on site and on location. You can kind of tell many times, even just by listening, that he is on site and on location. That's great. Basically what he does is he will give his version of the Old Testament story or New Testament story, because it's the entire Bible he's kind of working through. He'll give his version of the story that for the most part is pretty accurate. Sometimes he slants it to fit his next part, which is his interpretation of that. And so he's saying, this is what the Bible says, and this is what really happened. Well, yeah. There are some very clear flaws that he had in this. I'm going to look up. I'm just going to actually read my review here. So, unfortunately, as strong as this was on production, it was just as weak on fact. JPI had a formula that he used throughout the series. He would begin by presenting the biblical story, then he would share interesting historical or archaeological discoveries that further enlighten or bring context to the story. Then he would ask, so is, and then Moses or Abraham, or insert the biblical character here, historically true person? Probably not, because, and then he would give an extra biblical story that supposedly would disprove the fact that Moses really existed, or an extra biblical story that would disprove Abraham. But that doesn't matter because Abraham is really a representation of belief X. So he just, basically he was saying the Bible's not historically accurate, but that doesn't matter because it's not meant to be historically accurate. This is true for poetry and for some parts of the Bible. However, most of the Old Testament is actually history. And he is going by the assumption that it's not and then trying to prove it, rather than looking at the historical and archaeological and data and the facts, and then what does this tell us? So he's contradicts himself multiple times. It's really good production value, bad on fact. The best of the three, like I said, was The Holy Land Revealed by Jody Magnus. This one, Jody Magnus, is a professional archaeologist and also a professor at UNC Charlotte. And so she's bringing a level of personal experience that the other two don't have. They're more academic experience, but she's actually been there and worked on it and done the work herself. She's not conveying what other people's work has been and what other people's research. She's done this research. And I actually went to Masada. That'll be in a later video. But Jody Magnus, she was one of the archaeologists that helped uncover and restore what we have in Masada now. And reading this was almost better than the tour guide going through, who's an excellent tour guide. But reading this was a huge help for when I saw Masada. And she really did do a great job. She's also the best at saying what archaeology can tell us and can't tell us. So she'll say, this is what the archaeologists have discovered. This is what it tells us. This is what we don't know. And this is what we'll never know through archaeology. We need other ways to be able to find out this. So she doesn't just try to tell us what she thinks, but she actually presents multiple sides of many of the issues and does a really good job. Anyways, that's that. Those were the three great courses. Hers was the best. Jody Magnus did the best of those. The next book I've got is a reread, The Day the Revolution Began, Reconsidering the Meaning of Jesus' Crucifixion by N.T. Wright. I'm not going to talk a lot about this. because this book is going to be a specific review of its own. I will have a video just on this because this is one of the books that Read It Again was created to talk about. I read it again, you're going to hear about it. So, great book, get it, 5 stars. The next is also a 5-star. This was a biography of the guy who founded the university I'm at. Yeah, In the Dark Street Shining, a Palestinian story of hope and resilience in Bethlehem. This story is about Bishara Awad, and he relayed his story to Mercy Aiken, who wrote it. She is not, to my understanding, not a professional writer. She's a good writer, but the book lacks some of the things that some of the greatest biographies have. That's the only complaint I got about this. This was an incredible book. It was really good. For me, especially because I know the guy. And so I can almost hear him telling it himself as I'm reading it. And I can really hear his voice coming through, even though it was written by someone else. It's his story, and it's an amazing story. Bishara Awad, when he was a young boy, his father was killed by a sniper at the very beginning of what the Palestinians call the Nakba, the Night of Terror, the Day of Terror, when Israel became a country and the war broke out between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Almost right before that even started happening, his father was killed by an Israeli sniper. He was a civilian. He was not in any way a part of that, but he was killed. Bishar Awad then talks about his experience as an orphan, his amazing mother, and how she kept her, I think, 6 or 7 kids together and survived that horrible time. And then going on from there, he lived through 67 and through 76 and the other Jewish-Arab conflicts that occurred. He studied in America, went back, and then the Intifadas, the second Intifada, he's got an amazing story about. Part of that's at the beginning, part of it's at the end, so I don't want to spoil that. You need to read this book. Especially for Christians, many times the only version or side we hear about this aspect of history and about Israel in the Holy Land is the Israeli side or the Christian evangelical side. However, the Christian Palestinian side needs to be heard and needs to be told. And this is a great introduction to that. Even if that don't care for you, it's an amazing biography about a beautiful man who has kept such a beautiful spirit through so many hard difficulties. So I encourage you, grab this book, read this book. Next, I have Undistracted by Bob Goff. I talked a little bit about this. Undistracted, I started out not liking it. By the end, I did end up giving it 4 stars. Bob Goff writes some really great, easily readable, and has some amazing illustrations. A lot of times I view his humor kind of as like bad joke humor, but in long form. But so there's a few things I didn't like about the book, and one of those I talked about earlier. But overall, it was a good book. It was an interesting book, worth your time, worth your read. Bob Goff, Undistracted. Another book is Quiet. This is by Naomi Vaccaro, and it's part biography or memoirs and part a book about your devotional life and having your own personal quiet time with God. She kind of walks through the different stages of her life as a child in Mongolia, in rural Mongolia, then urban Mongolia, then being missionary kids, now living in America, going to university. Her dating experiences, her marriage experiences, her experiences being a mom. She walks through different stages of her life and talks about how those stages in her life impacted her quiet time. The main emphasis of this book is that it's important to have a quiet time, but also to have that time reflect where you're at in your life. And don't try to force what you might consider the ideal quiet time into the realities of what you're living. If you're a busy mom with 3 kids, your quiet time is going to look very different than a single guy with no kids like me. That's going to look different. And at different points in your life, there are going to be different circumstances. Allow those circumstances to change how you're doing a quiet time instead of getting frustrated and just giving up. So it's a great book. It's got some really good ideas, all kinds of little 2 or 3 paragraph stories of other people at different points in their lives sharing about their own personal quiet time or personal walks with God. So it's a really good book, really encouraging book. It's a type of book that's going to make you want to have a devotional time, not one that's going to make you feel guilty because your devotional time isn't as good as the one she's talking about. It's encouraging. It's let's do this together type of book. Great book, Quiet by Naomi Vaccaro. And then I read Bound Together. This is basically a history of globalization, and it's really 4 histories tied up in one, because the title is How Traders, Preachers, Adventurers, and Warriors Shaped Globalization. And then he takes each one of those things, the economic, the religious, exploration, and war, and he walks his way through history talking about the traders throughout history and how they created a gradually smaller and smaller world. And then the religious, the missionaries, and the religious advances, how they created a gradually smaller world. And then the adventurers and the explorers and how they created a smaller world. And so many times there's a lot of overlap between the 4. It does seem to get a bit repetitive because it seems like you're hearing the same story 4 times. You really are, just with highlighting different people and different events and different moments. A couple of these are really good. The traders, the economic impact of globalization, and then the war's impact on globalization. Both of those he did a really good job on. The adventures was okay. The preachers, Nyan Chandra obviously does not know Christianity or Islam at all. And his understanding of what they are was just no. So that really, for me, that really colored and tainted, and he's trying to, in his attempt to be unbiased and holding every religion as equal, he distorts multiple religions and multiple religious views, and also the lives and motivations of multiple religious figures in the past, some good, some bad, but he absolutely ruined that side. So you just skip that part if you're going to read this book. I gave it 3 stars. It was a weak 3 stars. And finally, the last book I have is Beginning Well, Seven Spiritual Practices for the First Year of Almost Anything. This book, it's exactly as advertised. Joe Stepanek, the author of the book, he gives really practical, good advice on how to begin something well. So if you are in a moment of your life or in a point of your life where you are starting or you're going to be starting something new, this would be a great book for you. It's a really good advice. Honestly, I wish I'd read this before I moved to Turkey, or certain moments in my life when I was beginning certain major events in my life. This would have been a great book to have. So if you are in those moments of your life, go ahead and do that. Those are the books I've read in July, and one of those was August. I have read a few more in August. However, those will be for my August reading wrap-up, which I do hopefully in 2 weeks or 3. Anyways, thank you. This is BJ. Go read it again.